Hi, my name is Karan Bhagi and I'm one of the founders here at the Altera Institute. You probably know that Altera Institute is an industry-backed business school that is building the next generation of young leaders for digital-first businesses. Through this video series, we want you to understand the learning experience at the Institute a lot better. So we are doing a sit-down with some of our mentors for you to understand what goes on behind the curriculum, what problem is the curriculum designed to solve for, and any reception of the industry or the previous batches on the curriculum. Yeah. Today I'm here with Aalekh, who's the co-founder at the Altera Institute, and we felt it'll be good for you to understand our thinking and what went behind the instructional design for the courses that we teach. And without further ado, let me just give it to Aalekh to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Aalekh Tripathi, co-founder here at the Altera Institute and also a mentor. My professional journey of almost a decade was only with Hindustan Unilever Limited across different functions. So I graduated from IIM Ahmedabad and I was fortunate enough to join the #1 FMCG company in the country and the CEO factory as a management trainee. At my time in HUL, I had the fortune of working across different businesses. So I started my professional journey being the area sales manager for Orissa, before moving to manage the beauty and personal care business online. The first role was predominantly to manage the business on marketplaces before I started building out D2C premium beauty brands for HUL. Of course, Karan, we worked together while we were at HUL. Why don't you tell everybody about your professional experience as well?
So my name is Karan Bhagi. I went to FMS and graduated in 2008. Like Aalekh, I also started my career at HUL. I was a summer trainee there and then they were nice enough to offer me a job. And I spent 14 years there before we started this organization. And at my 14 years at HUL, did a whole host of stints. Started off with general trade sales, moved to being a product manager before product management was called that. So used to design some rural distribution products for HUL back in the day. Became the senior brand manager for this lovely oral care brand called Pepsodent. And then moved to being the marketing manager and the marketing director for Surf Excel, before running the e-commerce business for HUL as the general manager for the business. And then, somewhere in 2022, the passion got the better of us and we kind of branched out to set up the Altera Institute to set the gold standard for sales and marketing education in this country.
Yeah. And Karan, one of the things, no matter how long a professional career one has had, there are always a couple of pivotal moments that when you look back and connect the dots that really shaped the career, right? So for instance, for me, the first is when I got the chance to join HUL, which was an organization that invested in my education and taught me a lot that one cannot learn in a business school. And the second was when we started working on e-commerce, because I think that allowed me to work on an emerging channel and building GTM skills that will be relevant not only today, but for the decades to come.
But I think the first big one for me was getting the opportunity to be a part of what was called the Gateway to Rural initiative as the product manager back in those days. But we were building apps and technology products for better rural distribution, efficiency, outreach, and hence, it's exactly what a product manager does. So I got the opportunity to run what was India's largest distribution joint venture at that point in time, and also got to build some applications and systems that were used by almost about 70,000-80,000 people downstream to run their business for HUL. So I think that was one, and why that was really special is because that stint taught me that the impact that an individual could have needn't be linear. Before that, I was a sales manager. We used to manage about 550-600 crores of annual business, and my team and me, we had impact equal to the business that we managed. We could grow it faster or slower, depending on what kind of a job that we did. But in this case, if I did a great job, it would downstream have a compounding effect across the jobs that 80,000 people did. So I think just the power of technology and just how large it could be was one learning there. And I think for me, the second and another very big one was getting the opportunity to manage Surf Excel, as the marketing manager. Surf Excel was this beautiful brand that was just at the cusp of growth. The organization had taken certain strategic calls to really democratize the brand and grow the brand disproportionately. Now, as part of the journey between 2,000 to 4,000 crores, so really getting to see scale and making decisions at scale, and also getting to see the long-term impact of the decisions firsthand. I think that's what really stood out to me.
But if we just draw back on reflections from our first role, because I graduated from IMA, I went to join as an ASM. I remember feeling very out of place, in the sense that I did not feel equipped to be able to solve those business problems. And these weren't very evolved business problems, right? And you would think that having graduated from a top B school, I would be able to do that. But it's not that I didn't manage to do it, but I realized that it was all first principles.
Yeah.
That I was just figuring it out a lot. So I remember feeling a bit like it was just continued education, that I was still learning for a prolonged period. And I remember wondering during that time, of how a lot of what I'd learned in 2 years is adding up or not adding up to what I was doing every day. How was your experience in your first stint?
Oh, very similar. Like I walked into the job, okay, saying, "Ha, padhai distributor, I know what it is, etc." But when I got there, I realized this is very different. Like I had no idea that it would work like this. I could draw a map of a distribution system, on a PowerPoint or on the board, but I had no idea that this is how people will be behaving. These are how the commercial incentives are aligned. These are how trade terms are structured. This is how distributors or retailers plan their business, and how large companies need to operate in order for them to maximize their throughput through these channel partners that you have, right? It was just a completely unknown. I didn't even know these things mattered, which is why HUL has the management trainee program. Imagine hiring a bunch of 40, 50 people from India's leading business schools and then putting them through 15 months of intense training on your own dime. Remember, you're paying them full-time salary during that period, and they're doing zero productive work for the organization. Why? Because you believe that if I get them to do this, they will be productive for me in the short to medium term, which fundamentally starts off from a premise that they don't know enough to be effective at their job on day one.
No, and it's not just true for HUL. HUL is perhaps the better of the lot because it has the most structured training program. But the same problem exists across most top companies that hire from top B schools, right? So that tacit acknowledgement that we're going to have to teach them functional skills is there across all sectors and all companies in the country.
The good part is some of them use us to now teach, to upskill their management trainees, which is welcome. But yeah, like the gap is certainly very, very large.
And Karan, a lot of more new joinees would have joined in your team through this about a decade and a half of your career, right? One is, of course, our lived experiences, which we've gone through. But if as a third person, you observe the new joinees that joined in your team, whether that was in sales or in brand management or even in e-commerce, right? As a third person observer, what did you see were gaps still? And I'm talking more recent, because obviously it's been a while since you joined the workforce, but even more recently, what are the gaps that you still see in new joinees, if you had to articulate that?
Sure. I think the first thing is whatever they know is very theoretical, right? It doesn't mean anything at work. And even in a largish setup like the ones we were a part of earlier, right? You would have two types of new joiners. One who would come in through the management trainee program, and there was enough time, money invested on them for them to know what to do broadly, okay? And then you had everybody who came in just directly, laterally, that we would hire, right? I think just day one job readiness is a massive problem, right? Because they have a theoretical idea of what needs to be done, but you give them a single line brief and, people struggle on what step 1, step 2, step 3 is. So for example, you will probably, if somebody new joins as a brand manager, you will tell them that, hey, we need to make a launch plan for this new variant we are launching. Why don't you make one and let's sit on a version 1 in a couple of days from now, right? But just that person's ability to think through how to get to it, right? Saying, okay, who is my audience, what is my sales goal, how much does it need to translate to distribution, blah, blah. Because there is no theoretical framework or nothing that you're taught in a business school kind of allows you to get to that understanding, right? So I think just day one job readiness in terms of even knowing what the steps involved to getting to a particular outcome was really, really low. I'm not getting into the behavior aspects of it. I think those are separate, but just functionally, there was just a very vague theoretical understanding of how things needed to be. What are your most biggest pet peeves or large observations about?
No, not really a pet peeve, because I don't think that the young professionals are to blame, honestly. They're a product of the system. But in addition to agreeing with, obviously, what you said, I think the one keen observation that I have, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, as technology adoption has boomed, is that technological tool awareness is very high.
Sure.
a lot of the driven people actually manage to learn the tools also, whether it's Excel basic or data visualization tools or marketing automation tools, ad platforms, Figma, whatever tool there is. You would say that the tool awareness, utilization, adoption is quite good, much better than what it was in our age, because information is a lot more available. Equally, though, the application or awareness of how to use it in a business context is really low. And I think that is also tougher to build. Perhaps the appreciation is also low that, hey, we have to build that. And that's what I would sort of just hope that more young professionals adopt, which is it's not enough to learn a tool. In fact, with the advent of generative AI, if your only skill is that you can use a tool, then I pray for you, honestly, because the skill that humans will continue to have is how do you apply that tool to a business context and enable decision making. So I think that's the one thing that stands out for me.
Now, let's maybe now take a seg in, right? If you could go back to your business education, right? And there were some things that you wish you knew the day you stepped into HUL. What would your wish list for those few things be?
I wish I'd seen more of the world. And I don't mean in a physical sense. Like, of course, like I wish I'd traveled more and gone to more outlets, distributors, etc. But also seen more of the world in terms of how organizations function. Because I think that was very new for me in terms of how team is managed, how different functions work together, how a retailer functions. Like everything was new. So it just felt like you were thrown into the deep end, and it was a massive inflection point in your learning, which I wish was more smoothened out, right? That's number one. The second is the involvement of commercial acumen in across functions. I think when we learn brand management in B school, it's about brand management. It's about the 6 Ps. It's about portfolio, price, pack price architecture, whatever. When we learn distribution, it's about hub spoke, best service levels, etc. We never marry that with the commercial implications. And everything in business is commercial implications. When you're doing sales, it's about margin, ROI. When you're doing marketing, it's about gross margin and margin accretiveness and all of those things. So I think we always saw commercial as a separate function, which I did not enjoy learning and studying about. When I joined HUL, I realized that I love it. And I want to do things that drive commercial output for businesses. I wish I had discovered that while I was learning, because I think I could have spent the 2 years at IIM a lot better that way. So I think these two things, which was involvement in commercial and just seeing more of the world and how things function. I wonder what it is for you, which you wish was done differently or you experienced differently in B school.
Yeah, like if I think about it, there are probably a couple for me as well. And I think the first and the major one is we read theoretical concepts in the business school, right? Like let's take marketing mix is these 6 Ps, right? Yeah. But did we ever get down and get into, say, a 6P breakdown, going very deep into each one of them? Or even if we did, right, it was a very theoretical exercise and we didn't know tinkering with what will lead to what outcome. So I really wish that I was a part of some experiences that gave me a through cycle view, right? I wish I was behind the scenes on certain processes. I think the second big one was the relationship with the industry, right? If you think about, if I go back to my B school, and I remember about the most memorable learning experience, it was with this one professor who we had, whose name was Mr. Sundar Hemrajani. He wasn't a full-time professor, he was a visiting professor. He again was ex-HUL, by the way, but then worked for a whole lot of companies, including Pepsi. If I'm not wrong, Sundar sir was the executive director of sales for Pepsi. And then, I think he was the CEO and managing director for Whirlpool. I think, I'm not very sure. But he used to teach sales and distribution to us. And when I used to take his class, I would wonder saying, why can't every class be like this, right? He was probably the only industry person with whom we would have a deep connect. So I really wish I could have got a lot more mentorship and deeper functional mentorship with some of these people than what I did. Yeah, I think both of these would have just helped me walk into the work that I did with far more realism and probably gotten me effective far earlier than what I
No, and I think these are two
was.
critical pegs that we've obviously built out at Altera Institute also, right? Which is industry relationship, of course, is a key pillar. But also what you mentioned about deep work and seeing the through cycle view. Because the courses at Altera Institute interact with each other. I think the limitation that you called out was because courses were finite and boundaried, right? So you couldn't test out a proposition because that was taught in market research.
Yeah.
And the same prof would not teach, right? And there was very little coordination in terms of cross-subject projects, which of course we've solved for through term projects here at the Altera Institute. But let's talk about the curriculum and what you've spent time now teaching the second batch of Altera Institute students also. Why don't you talk about the course and the sprints that you've taken for the students here?
Sure. Last year, I taught advertising management, and that's a subject that I'm deeply passionate about. And thankfully, this year we found somebody better to do it. Okay, so we've upped the game on advertising management. So this year, I am teaching two things as we speak. One is digital business models, which is how to decode digital-first businesses. It's something that I got first-hand experience on seeing the e-commerce business, retailer business models, as well as the D2C business models that we were exposed to. Also in the earlier product management hat, and what tech-only businesses and the way they scale, and what are the commercial models behind them. So we teach a bit about thinking through the whole process, right? From ideation to testing, to designing a MVP, to getting your first customers, to retention, to scaling, to monetization, right? The whole cycle is what we run the students through. So I think that's one part, and that is not taught at any other business school, right? And essentially, if you think about it today, every business is a digital business because consumers are literally spending, 5 hours in front of a screen, and what they see on that screen determines what they think about the world in general, what brands they consume, and where they spend their money, who they vote for, right? It's essentially shaping everybody's lives in the world around us. So every business is a digital business.
And our digital business is fundamentally different, wherein they need to be studied differently, because one could argue that it's just another business. We are making an MBA program, so why should those principles not apply here?
Yeah. Now look, if you look at it a very macro view, no. Okay, there are some investments you make in setting up the business. Earlier, you would make that investment in setting up a factory if you're doing a physical business, or in setting up the infrastructure. If you were, say, running a logistics business, you would buy all your trucks and your fleet, right? Or if you shipping businesses, you'll buy the ships, right? And then you would, of course, monetize them over a period of time, right? Concept is very similar here also. You make an investment in the technology of that business, and then hopefully you have some users that use it and you're able to monetize the whole process, right? So the concept is similar, which is setting something up today that you can monetize over a period of time. And what you set up is usually an underserved or an unserved need, but the way it is done is absolutely very, very different.
I think that's also similar to the course that I take, right? Which is growth marketing. Because when you tell the name of the course to a traditional marketer, they're like, isn't all marketing growth marketing? Because all marketing is intended to drive business growth. And while that is fundamentally true, that the business objective has not changed, the tactics and strategies have changed dramatically for a digital business, right? Growth marketing is a term that you typically use for a digital business and how you deploy tactics to grow. This is, of course, a course in which I draw from my own experiences and learnings managing the e-commerce and D2C business for the beauty part of HUL. And one of the key processes that we follow in class for these students is how do you split your growth strategies into acquisition and retention strategies, right? Now, it is because that digital businesses and digital platforms allow you to speak very differently to different users at different points in time that you need a differentiated strategy. Yeah. Now, of course, you can't do hyper-personalization in terms of you're saying different things to different users at all points. But how can you say different things to acquire users and get them onto the platform in the first go versus retaining users? And both of these are critical to business successes. But there's very little structured education that students go through, that marketing professionals go through, that splits it. That's the part that I cover in growth marketing as well. And I think the only missing leg here that remains is how do the costs stack up, right? Which is how much do I invest in acquisition? How much do I invest in retention? How does that stack up to the media cost? And that's, I think, something that you have covered in class with the students as well. Maybe you want to just talk about that.
Yeah. Yes, we do that as well as, some more stuff. And look, I think there are some stuff that is new. but then there's some stuff that is old. And let's take something like a P&L management, right? When I was at B school, we learned P&L management by looking at some slides and by simulating, doing something on an Excel to just kind of understand each of the line items and what they meant. So we had a reasonable understanding of the line items, what they meant. But I think what most people do not have an understanding of what happens when something changes, right? So for example, all of a sudden, if your business grows 5x, what are the line items that get impacted and why, right? So for example, all of a sudden your fixed cost as a percentage will go down, your media cost will go down as a percentage because leverage starts flowing through the P&L. So there is an incentive for you to scale much, much faster because that means that your EBITDAs would improve much, much faster. So, scale ke saath some of these things improve much more dramatically. Or what happens when, say, acquisition happens, but retention doesn't follow through, right? So you're spending a lot of money for acquisition, but not enough retention means that you might be making decent margin, but you're not retaining any of it because you're on this constant treadmill of acquisition, right? And which line items do they impact and what would that business look like, right? So a lot of people would know what some of these terms mean, and I would argue any person graduating from a top tier business school will tell you, okay, this is what gross margin means, this is what PBO means, and this is what, say, CM1 also means. But very few will be able to think through what happens when, right? And eventually, when you run a business or when you run a P&L, you are not having to define stuff. You are expected to create an outcome by moving some of the levers above that, right? So, and because that's the job, it is very, very important to understand these linkages. So what I run as a part of the sprints based system in the sprints construct is this thing called P&L Playground, where we get students to run through different simulations, different scenarios. Students do it in teams, and it gets really, really competitive. I remember the last one that we did was supposed to be a 2-hour session which continued till almost, 2 hours, 45 minutes. And even then, students had doubts, and I think I spent another 45, 50 minutes just clearing doubts. So a 2-hour session going to 4 hours, and there were multiple of these, right? So that's what the students go through to just get better at P&L management.
Yeah. No, and I think that's also showing in the outcomes that we've had for the last batch, right? Of course, we had some recruiters come back and tell us that our students were actually made to take sessions during their orientation. By take sessions, I don't mean attend, but they were actually teaching the other new joinees, because these were people who had come from B schools as a group, and our students were obviously conceptually so clear because as a result of activities like the P&L Playground, wherein they were actually meant to take sessions for the other new joinees. I think that was a very fulfilling moment and memory that I have.
Also, just in terms of some of the outcomes that the students went to, right? If you look at jobs like category management, account management, etc., especially the ones that require you to look at slightly wider in terms of commercial metrics that you manage, they are not jobs that you do straight out of a business school, right? These are jobs that you do typically as a second stint or what is called a first bounce. So first bounce is, as a company, you hire somebody from another company who's done that job before, right? But look at where some of our students ended up going to, right? They've gone as account managers, where they manage not just the top line, but the bottom line for those brands, as category managers, where again, they manage users as well as CM2s for those particular retail businesses that they're a part of, right? In quick commerce, where again, they are responsible for vendor management and vendor margin management, which again are very, very deep jobs that require people to have a lot of functional understanding and not something that you get directly out of a B school. So those kind of outcomes also kind of talk about the fact that when the industry sees people skilled with these things, they are more than happy to lap them up and give them opportunities which are beyond their years, so to say. One of the things that I do feel is that this is no accident, and there is some thinking that we've put in, which is the method behind this madness, which is what we call the instructional design framework at the Altera Institute, right? Aalekh, you want to talk a bit more about that?
Sure. If you just break down the construct of education, it's primarily 3 things, right? Which is who teaches, what they spend their time teaching, and how they teach, which is the mentors, the curriculum, and the pedagogy. Now, given that our objective is to help our students land great careers in great digital first companies, it's very evident, and we've worked backwards from that, right? So if you look at the mentors are leaders from their fields from top companies, right? So every single mentor has spent at least a decade in the industry, and they're really, really good at what they do. And that is why they are capable and qualified almost to speak to the students.
And they're not here for a guest lecture.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're here for 20, sessions, sprints.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and I think what it really helps build is the second part, which is the curriculum. If we just think about what is taught across B schools, it is prescribed typically by a central body, right? Which can be the ICT, UGC, whatever government body is there, which prescribes, hey, XYZ are the subjects that you should teach. For each of those subjects, this is the book that you should refer to. Most professionals that you and I know and speak to have their own mental models and frameworks that have helped them excel in their careers, right? All of the organizations also have these frameworks. Plus, they've had the opportunity to build their own mental model.
Yeah.
So when they're in class with the students at Altera Institute, these are the mental models and frameworks that get built because it is believed and proven that these frameworks help drive business growth. Otherwise, the organizations wouldn't be using them. That leaves the most challenging part for last, which is how we teach, which is the pedagogy, because it's still relatively simpler to identify what the students need to learn. But the how is what is the really challenging part. And the simple philosophy is that if the students are not applying it within 48 hours of having learned the concept, then they'll forget it, right? So it's really as simple as that. The application can be something which is a micro application, which can be a 2-hour project or a sprint that they undertake or a simulation that they do. And it can be a 3-month long-term project where they apply a host of concepts. But 100% of the concepts that they learnt in class are applied starting from within 48 hours, then it can go on till 3 months after they've learned the concept also. So that summarizes who teaches, which is industry mentors, what they teach, which is industry-backed frameworks, and how they teach, which is purely an application-based pedagogy, which is helping us drive these learning outcomes here at the Institute.
Yeah. And that is just today, it was just the two of us about the who teaches. For everybody here, we've shot a whole video series with all of the other mentors that make the magic happen at the Institute. In fact, there is over 40 mentors that teach throughout the 12-month of the on-campus journey of the PGP. And you must watch some of the other videos to hear how they've translated and condensed all of their work experiences into designing the curriculum and the program for the students, right? That's that from our end. Hope you enjoy the rest of the videos and hope to see some of you here at the Altera Institute with us in the next year.